everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Proactive versus Reactive with ServiceNow IT Asset Management. Our presenters today are Daniel Slocum, Shane Cooper, and Chris Keyser. Before we begin, I'd like to just give you a little background information about GlideFast Consulting. Recently named the America's Elite Partner of the Year and the Global Elite Partner of the Year, GlideFast has over 3,100 ServiceNow certifications, over 500 expert consultants, and a CSAT score of 4.8 out of 5. And many other accolades, as you can see here. Before we begin, we'd like to launch an initial poll for today's webinar. So on your screen, you should see the question, would you say you are being proactive or reactive in your use of IT asset management? Okay, so it looks like 73% of you are being reactive, so you are in the perfect place today to learn how to become more proactive when it comes to IT asset management. Now I'm going to pass it off to Shane Cooper to kick off the webinar.
Today, I'm just going to go through a little bit of agenda right now. So we're looking at the proactive versus reactive approach. So moving from the gotchas to got you. With this, we really want to go into what being proactive is with asset management and what being reactive really means. Based on the poll, it sounds like a lot of you are already kind of aware of that as it goes forward. So we're going to go through each individual area, go into hardware asset management, what it means for proactive versus reactive in that, software asset management and the same thing, and then enterprise asset management. And then we'll have some time at the end for any questions and answers. With this, I kind of wanted to give a high-level overview of proactive versus reactive and what it means. That way we can get into detail of how we can address some of these issues. So reactive, obviously, you're looking at management addressing issues as they come up, maybe not really understanding what is causing the issues, just addressing them day by day as you see them. Being proactive, you're looking at addressing the issues before they come up, trying to anticipate the problems. Think of something like an audit. You know an audit's coming up, so you want to go ahead and gather that data correctly before it gets to that point. ITAM and ServiceNow is really broken down into three different areas. You're looking at hardware asset management, software asset management, and enterprise asset management now. We're going to discuss each of the ways that each of those areas can really help with that proactive versus reactive approach. And we do have one more poll that we wanted to go ahead and give before we move into each area.
Perfect. We are launching poll number 2. Which product of ITAM are you most interested in? HAM, SAM, or enterprise asset management? So Shane, it looks like 54% of people are interested in HAM, 35% in SAM, and 12% in enterprise asset management.
All righty. Sounds like I got my work cut out for me in the next section. So we're going to be a little less formal with this one right now. I'm going to ask Chris Keyser and Daniel Slocum if there's anything that they want to bring up while I'm talking. Please feel free. This is a group effort here. We are all really experts in all of asset management, but we each have our own individual areas that we kind of specialize in. So really, if there's any questions on the back end as well, please feel free to ask them. I wanted to get into what hardware asset management is first. So we're looking at really the IT assets part of this. So you're looking at your servers, your network equipment, your end user computing, all the way into your consumable items like your cables, your docking stations, your speakers. So with this, there's a big difference between your assets and your consumables on this. So with asset management, you're wanting to look at that financial impact to your organization. Who has the asset? What is its use, and any contractual information that you have, like any maintenance or support or end of life or extended warranty. Without hardware asset management in place, really the organizations wouldn't know what assets they own. If you're looking at assets that maybe somebody leaves the company and they still have an asset, that's something big that we want to bring back in. Or maybe there's assets that are sitting in the stock rooms that are still assigned to users that have already left. So really getting a handle on everything around your hardware asset lifecycle and financials. I mentioned lifecycle a little bit here. So, and I've already mentioned asset management is not configuration management. Configuration management is going to be the focus on the usage of the assets, the relationships that it has in your network, the actual information of a live device. With asset management, Like I said, you're looking at the financial piece of this, but that gets into the life cycle part of this. So we're looking at request, procurement, receiving those assets as they are shipped and received to you after they're procured, keeping them in stock, and then at the end of the life cycle, we're looking at disposal of these, retirement and disposal, maybe tracking information for the certificate of destruction. That way you can verify that this asset was disposed of correctly. So with that, asset management is important to actually hold the data. But whenever you get into the automation of it, that's whenever you really start seeing the benefit of this. Getting into proactive hardware asset management here. So with this, like we've already talked about some of the overview of hardware asset management, what it is. There are some key areas where you can be more proactive versus reactive with this. So the first one that we're looking at is the advanced shipment notice or the purchase order receiving side of this. So whenever you order an asset, you want to create that asset as early as possible in the system. That way, you know the financial impact to the organization immediately. So you're looking at model creations during the PO process, the asset creation during the receiving process. That way, you're not having to wait for Discovery or SCCM or Ivanti to scan the device and know that it's in your system. You already know from the moment of ordering it. Getting into inventory and stock orders. So stock rules are something inherent to ServiceNow stock rooms. And the stock rules allow you to kind of maintain the stock levels. You can do that for both assets and consumable items. And this will ensure that you always have those resources available before somebody orders it and you realize that you need to procure it. We're getting into asset audits now. I mentioned audits a little bit earlier. Audits, really the important thing is knowing where your assets are. And that way you're not having to have a risk of losing them or having security breaches. The same thing with the asset audits as well. I mentioned disposals. So if you are accurately disposing of something and you go to audit that list of assets, you should know where those are, what the state of them is. Did you actually destroy the hard drive to get rid of the PII data that's on there? The next line here that I want to talk about is warranty tracking. So we do have quite a few different warranty integrations that we've tied into. The important piece of this is to actually track that warranty as it's related to the asset, whether it's just a single date for the end of warranty, if you've gotten an extended warranty. We want to make sure that we're tracking that so that we know whenever we can start getting into refreshes. Refreshes with warranty tracking makes it a lot easier to keep up with assets that are becoming end of life. If you go through and say, I have 2,000 laptops that are going to be end of life in 6 months, we need to go ahead and start working on a refresh process for it. Asset reclamation. So this is getting more into the later life cycle piece of this, getting into the retirement of this. So proactively collecting and reissuing assets. I already mentioned refreshes here. This is part of that process. So we're taking those assets, we're reclaiming them, and then we are accurately retiring them and disposing of them. So once you start getting into collecting that data, you can know, hey, I want to know where this specific asset is. And you look at that, look at the states and substates, and you look at the different life cycle history of it, and you know exactly where it is and what's going on with it. And I've already mentioned refresh orders as well. So really with this one, ServiceNow does make it easier for you to go ahead and refresh a list of assets based on models, based on warranties. So this makes it a lot easier to get into.
There's a question here that I thought you might want to answer live before we move on. And the question is about warranty tracking fields out of the box. Are they out of the box or are they custom?
Yeah, there is one date field for warranties that you can have out of the box. That is something that's already stored on the asset record. And then there's also the relationship of contracts to assets. So one of the recommendations is usually to create your contract records to track those warranties and then associate the contract with the specific assets that are covered. So contracts can actually have a one-to-many relationship. So you can have one contract that would cover many different assets if you have an extended warranty on them or just a regular warranty on them. And you can associate that with the specific assets that are covered. I don't know, Daniel, if you wanted to add anything else.
I think you were great. Thank you.
All right. Really, the last piece for me here, I wanted to show a little bit of the asset workspace that is in Ham Pro. With this one, I mentioned we're looking at like the expirations of warranties. We're looking at any of the leasing contracts or any of the warranty contracts, any of the requests that are coming through, whether it's a purchase request or a refresh request. And that information is really shown very clearly in the asset workspaces. It's it's very useful to have that visibility here into the system because you want to make sure that you can look at this and you know exactly immediately within 2 seconds of looking at it exactly what needs to be done and what is on the plate to actually continue working on. These workspaces can actually be changed around if necessary. This is just the specific asset overview, but whenever you're getting into managing the assets themselves, you want a place like this to go in and work out of on a daily basis. That way you're keeping track of everything before it comes up. This is a big piece for being proactive. Alrighty, next up, we are getting into software asset management. And I will pass this off to Chris Keyser.
Good to be here with you all today. So as we talk about software asset management, there are a few aspects I think that obviously we're aware of, just that when we talk asset management, there are some similarities between HAM, SAM, and EAM, just in terms of the nomenclature we use and kind of key things that we want to keep track of. So I'm going to do my best not to repeat too many things, but try and really focus in on the unique aspects of SAM as it pertains to being proactive in your approach. The key thing that we want to hit on are really the aspects of the licensing complexity that is really inherent with SAM, and really trying to identify, how we manage, how to measure, and how to optimize these components, right? So when we have an uncertain compliance position, knowing the reactive way and the reactive response really comes from that, pending audits, right? You get that notification from a publisher, from a software vendor that you're going to be audited to make sure that you're using what you've actually purchased, as opposed to already knowing where you stand, right? So kind of dealing with that compliance position ahead of time, getting to that proactive approach of, we already are aware of this. We can see the data, we can see our installation base, our cloud base of the products we're using, and we know that we're accurately using these solutions. There's also those aspects of overspending. It leads into that follow-up, not just from a compliance perspective, but am I carrying more licenses on the shelf? And therefore I'm unaware that I am overspending when I hit those points of renewal. Not sure if we have what we need. Are we overbuying? Are we underbuying? Do we end up having to add entitlements partway through an agreement period? But being aware of what your threshold limits are, of how you're trending towards your maximum use case during a given period of time, gives that information already so that you're prepared for those renewals and you're prepared for those auditing perspectives, and that you're holding that fiscal responsibility of the product that you own, as well as making sure that you're properly reclaiming underutilized product. And that it's back on the shelf ready for redistribution to other users in your organization. And then also just the aspects of optimizing your software spend. We know that there's a massive move towards cloud-based or subscription-based product. So having an idea of what's out there, not relying so much on a legacy tool set that you have to constantly go to these cloud-based solutions or log into multiple admin consoles or anything like that, or just look at your SCCM or your Intune aspects, and then try and bring all that information together, that you centralize it and then try and do the counts in that way. Having kind of a more intuitive way to bring that data together and give you those solutions and give you that information in a way that's consumable. And so ways in which we get to that proactive approach is really that software license reclamation. That's one of the key aspects that we identify, is that you're never overextended, but you're also not paying for software's use when it's not actually being used. And so leveraging the solution in a way, and this was a key aspect for a solution, apologies. This is a key aspect for solutioning where a client I was working with, they did have a lot of distributed software that was underutilized. And because they weren't getting that use case determined, they didn't know how underutilized that product was. And so we're massively overspending. They also had aspects where software renewal was key. And the streamlining of that process, when we talk about contracts as well as software entitlements, streamlining that process in a way that allows not only renewals to be made aware of ahead of time. We know that the lead time is a key factor for renewals, because there's not just the contract renegotiation, there's actually the procurement, the purchase, and the entry of the entitlement to make sure that all of those things are in line, that your purchases of licenses are going to align with business needs, especially as you've looked at your trending of your maximum use of particular software licenses. So streamlining both the contractual obligation, the lead time necessary to negotiate those contracts and purchase the software, as well as the entitlement entry that's ready to take over when it reaches that point of activation where the old entitlement has expired, reached its end of term. You have that new entitlement already ready to go. So you don't have any gap between an entitlement end and an entitlement start that would essentially leave that in-between period in a non-compliant perspective. Also, aspects that are very pertinent in a proactive approach is understanding what products are contained within suites. The classic examples that industries deal with, regardless of vertical, but one of the things that we know is Microsoft 365 products. There's multiple applications included in a 365 suite, multiple applications included within a Creative Cloud with Adobe Suite, and other solutions that essentially have multiple products. So being able to understand what's associated with that in an intelligent way where the suite is defined and you know that the suite is being used as opposed to an individual license for an individual product assists with that, compliance perspective, but also ensuring that you don't end up in an overpaying scenario. And then as well, those SaaS integrations, right? As we discussed, so many products are moving to cloud-based. And so being able to get that information through those integrations from your SaaS providers to be able to tell you what you need and when you need it, as well as what the use case is, because we know that some of those products are only used in the cloud. And so we're not looking at an installation base, but we still need to know that our subscription usage lines up, which is ultimately going to lead to our ability to understand what our true up position is in terms of, how many more do we need to buy, as well as ensuring that we're not in that over licensed perspective. One of the ways that this really assists is normalization. And that's really why I want to hit on that specifically, is because we know that versioning changes drastically. And so kind of having that centralized understanding of when you're in a given entitlement versus when you really need to be associating with a different one, having that normalization to give you a clarity of mind when you're looking at your software products, so that that installation and that cloud product is properly aligned with a singular product identification. So we know we're consuming the right license. We're not guessing about whether, just using the example here that I have on the slide, whether Adobe 15, 16, and 17 are actively different entitlements, different licensing structures, that they are essentially the same product. They do fall under the same contract and entitlement agreement, so that you make sure that you have data consistency, which is going to assist in, again, accurate reconciliation, which gives us that end result of knowing what we own. And this was a major concern working with a client. They were unable to determine which various product licenses were in a position of compliant or non-compliant because they had such a wide berth between versioning that knowing whether it was included in the product entitlement or not became a bit of a concern.
Chris,
Yeah.
let me add something to that. There's also risk, right? So if you've got down revision software and it's normalized to something that's, subsequently really, long time ago, it's out of end of cycle, end of support, all those things, you can proactively, once you see them in your environment, work to take them out and move and migrate people to the most current version. Thus, you're mitigating risk to your infrastructure and your network.
Absolutely. And that's really using that life cycle approach based on this content library as well, right? Because it's looking at the life cycles provided by those publishers, saying they're no longer supporting a particular version. And so we can, again, take that proactive approach, no longer supported software, making sure it's going to be flagged, identified, removed from your environment, and that you can be properly upgraded to the compliant, safe, supported version of product in your environment.
I did want to add one thing as well.
Yeah.
I think we're all jumping in on this one. So earlier, whenever I mentioned contracts and being able to associate contracts with assets, the same thing can be done with your software entitlements as well. And in cases where you have maybe extended support on certain products that are already hitting end of life, but you're paying for end of support, you can track that on the contracts and associate that with the entitlements as well. Just part of being proactive on that, so you're not questioning whether you still have support or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, we'll hit on. So one of the other ways as well that I want to stress, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide because I think it's relatively straightforward, but understanding a centralized data approach to how you manage your software. So having those direct integration profiles connected with your cloud providers, being able to capture things like your virtual machine installations, leveraging SCCM, JAMP, based on what you're using in your environment and what's capturing software, and bringing those multiple data sources together so you get a full picture of what your installation base looks like, both in the cloud and on local machines, so that you can reconcile to your entitlements and give you that position report that's going to tell you where you need to be concerned, where you need to potentially purchase more, reclaim, etc. This really is a crux of having a proactive approach towards your software asset management and making sure that you can appropriately capture what your user base looks like, whether machine-based, core-based, user-based, etc. All those different licensing metrics that we have to account for in the software space. Just like hardware asset management, we also have workspaces associated with software asset management. So again, kind of being that diligent consumer of your software products and being able to see, where are compliance positions at, what publishers, products, where is our over licensed amount, where do we need to kind of trim some of that over licensed number, what do we need to consider about expiring products, expiring entitlements, products that are going to come out of support, as we talked about, leveraging that normalization and versioning to know when those products need to be restricted for no longer being supported, pulled and upgraded appropriately. And software asset management makes that available to you in a similar fashion to hardware asset, where you can really consume and take a look at what your potential savings are, where your main true up costs are associated. So what vendors do you really need to focus on to make sure that you're hitting those compliance targets and making sure that there's no real risk if they were to kind of make that phone call that an audit is going to occur. And you can see there's a few different ways that we do that. The license workbench, of course, is taking that data even further to really dig into not only each individual publisher, but each individual product, and giving you those full breakdowns of true up costs, over license amounts by publisher, then by product, as well as giving those remediation solutions that are going to help you. So, do we need to create allocations because we haven't captured them appropriately? Do we need to, reclaim restricted product? Are there unlicensed installations out there that we need to pull back? And again, just giving you the tools to attack those situations and make sure that you're not in that position of risk, which could have a financial impact on that. And so that's using the license workbench to your advantage and leveraging those calculations for your day-to-day operation of work in the space. And then even doing those final kind of end of life things that we're talking about in terms of life cycle, where we are dealing with removal candidates for any number of reasons. We've talked about, proactively reclaiming underutilized, you can see low usage, or restricted software. It's no longer supported. It's a product that shouldn't exist in our environment, and taking advantage of those reports that give us those end of life products that need to be taken out. They're no longer going to be supported. Do we have a new entitlement for the latest version pending? Is it being renewed? Is it coming up? And so those are multiple ways in which we can start attacking and being proactive with our use cases and software in our environment specifically. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel as we look into EAM.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. So to get us started talking about Enterprise Asset Manager, how it can be used proactively within your integration, I first wanted to show you how it fits in relationship with software and hardware asset management within ServiceNow. They're completely complementary as an asset managed application portfolio, but in most cases, the data doesn't overlap. Shane talked about how you can leverage contracts across all of those, and you can as well with Enterprise Asset Management. You can connect contracts to your assets. But mostly the data doesn't really move between the three applications. And there's a reason for that. Obviously, let me back up. Software, of course, is installed on a device, which is ham and configuration management. But generally speaking, they're siloed within their spaces. And the reason for that is because hardware asset management, that is a function on its own, and hardware asset manager may not be proficient in licensing. And so software asset management is different. Enterprise asset management has some nuances as well, and they are also siloed, although they use some of the same tables. And so we'll get into that a little bit, but mostly I wanted to say that administrators of EAM do not need to worry about, are my models going to get mixed up and those sorts of things. ServiceNow already has solved that for you. So they proactively took care to make sure that you're going to work out just fine. Like HAM, Enterprise Asset Management has an overview, and also like SAM that Chris just walked through, the overview dashboard is presented by default when you open the application. The cards in the top row allow you to take proactive actions. These increase your data accuracy, and they allow you to manage certain actions before they become a problem. Across the top, we have asset requests, transfer order lines, stock orders, loaners, RMAs, disposals. And those are all key functions that we already talked about in the other arenas, but here in Enterprise Asset Management, you may have a critical device, such as an MRI machine, those big ones that you go in the room and you have to take off all your, your metal. Those are very costly. And if those are becoming to a point where they need maintenance or end of life, or a specific cycle is coming to an end, you want to know that ahead of time. That's a very big purchase or a repair that you need to do for standard maintenance. And so preemptive and proactive maintenance to keep things moving. This dashboard allows you to do that. The bottom bar there, asset counts by life cycle, I think this one is really important because it allows you to identify clearly which assets you have coming up, and then you can proactively plan for the replacement or extension of support. So this dashboard is your working place. It's the place that you come to start your day. It's the place that you work through and encounter and preempt problems before they become a massive issue for you. So thus the dashboard is your working space. ServiceNow Enterprise Asset Management allows organizations to create and use, and this is probably the most important feature of EAM, multi-component assets in the data structure. Simply put, assets are sometimes made of other assets. Multi-component assets come together pre-assembled from a vendor, or you can put them together from assets that you have in stock. Those are called user assembled. And for those, we see organizations sourcing a mix of assets and spare parts externally or from internal warehouses to compile common item collections into kits to treat as one asset. Like a blood pressure cuff, a digital thermometer, or a pulse ox reader, that in a laptop computer, these from different manufacturers, they all form a patient intake, cart that a nurse may use when you go to your primary care provider, or you're at an emergency room at a hospital. Those can be collected from different sources for user assembled. Or it could be a repair kit for technicians, or a more robust medical cart with mixed components. Other times it's pre-assembled. The organization acquires these already put together, sent and shipped from the vendor. There may be important components such as an ultrasound connected wand, a computer, a monitor, specialized keyboard, consumable gel for ultrasounds, et cetera. These are all repairable or replaceable that the organization wants to track, but they come fully assembled as one asset, except for maybe the consumables. ServiceNow EAM lets you manage individual component assets in each multi-component asset as an asset record in the inventory and as stock for installation or deployment, for reservations, for service maintenance, for returns and swaps. And they can all, except for user assembled, which needs to be deconstructed first, but the vendor, the ones that come from the vendor pre-assembled, those go out the door as a unit for retirement, whereas the user assembled, you deconstruct those and send them out as for retirement. One of the most crucial and often overlooked responsibilities of an asset management team is maintaining spare parts. Systems requiring 24/7 uptime need hot swappable components readily available within stock rooms and on maintenance technician service vehicles. These can be managed as stock rooms in EAM, and they can be used as individual stock rooms or virtual stock rooms, but they are managed there in EAM as stock rooms. And the use of stock rules to provide a safety net to automate reorder of parts and assets when the number of in-stock units drops below a predetermined threshold helps you to proactively stay prepared to react to a problem. And so, the kind of a strange way to put that, but knowing that you're going to have to react when crisis comes, you proactively prepare so that you have the components on hand to be available to manage those crises. So it allows for minimizing response times and ensures critical components are present and ready for use. While not wholly pre-active, I think it's important to talk about recalls. This is a great feature with EAM. When a recall notice is received from a regulatory body or original equipment manufacturer, prescriptive flows in EAM allow you to quickly identify impacted assets. You can map them by their serial number, by VIN numbers, and quickly track where those asset records are, and you can identify who has them. Then you move into the remediation phase. You can choose to repair, replace, or follow other simple steps within the workflow to come to a conclusion to fulfill that recall. Knowing that recall happens on some products within your organization, if you're a fleet manager, certainly vehicles have recalls. If you are a major, hospital organization or life sciences organization, many of those larger components may have some sort of recall happen to them during their life cycle, and being prepared to respond to those is a great feature within EAM. So the tracking of service contracts, I think we covered this pretty well in some of the other discussions. Shane hit it twice. He talked about it in regards to asset management. He talked to it in regards to software asset management. And the same thing happens here. You're able to track those warranties and identify when products are coming out of warranty. And at that point, you may choose to extend the warranty, or you may choose to replace the item. And so being able to associate contracts and warranty contracts especially, and service contracts to your products allow you to identify when that asset is coming out of warranty and that service contract. It's a big feature for especially if you have outsourced your servicing of your infrastructure components. So if you're a hospital and you've got multiple sites, hospital organization, multiple sites, you've got service contracts with a provider to go out and fulfill maintenance. And knowing when that service contract is going to end, being proactive to renew it on time, it keeps your uptime, 100% uptime is what we're looking for. There you go. So refresh of assets. You can see some parallels and some themes across these three expertise areas: enterprise, software, and HAM. We want to identify the aging assets, their useful life, their model life cycle, the OEM into support, warranty, and service contracts. Reporting in ServiceNow and the dashboards built right into EAM tells you when these need to be refreshed. And so much like the others, there's that similar process. EAM was built with HAM in consideration. And so many of the same features and the same workflows work almost the exact same way in EAM. So if you're familiar with HAM, EAM will be simple for you. So lease assets, if you're leasing some of your hospital components, some of your major assets, knowing when the lease is nearing end is something that we haven't talked about yet. And so you want to plan for that lease end. Do you buy it out? Do you extend the lease? Do you collect all the equipment, how it was when it was procured, and ship it back to the vendor and replace it with refresh? Planning for that is crucial. So proactively understanding when your leased items are going to expire, so that you can preemptively and proactively plan and bring in other equipment to replace them, or making sure that you are collecting all the components and identify that through an audit or inventory, physical inventory, so that you can send those and ship those back to the vendor. Here I want to talk about some of the, just recap some of the major pieces of proactive leveraging EAM proactively. But I want to talk about it in the scope of a customer story a little bit here. So one customer that I've worked with, they manage all of their field communications and turnstiles equipment on buses and trains. They're a vendor that services transportation equipment and the electronics that allow you to tap on and tap off with near field communications devices. Vending machines that sell those devices, the turnstiles themselves, the pieces that are on the buses, all of that has to be managed proactively in order to keep those transportation or the organization that runs those moving efficiently. And so if you're a municipality and you've contracted with this company, you don't want those devices to go down because it could cause efficiency decreases in your timeliness. What they have in place is they identify the useful life of each of the components and they proactively replace them. They fulfill them with the, if they're in warranty and something breaks, they proactively replace those, maintaining those warranties, but they replace those under warranty. And they want to budget for asset replacement as well. One of the things that they also did was they added field services as a component to EAM, and in this case, this customer was on the old asset plugin, and they built a lot of features that are now available in EAM. Field services allows you to, schedule work orders and the technicians to go out and actively repair things. And so bundling EAM with field services allows your organization to not only manage the assets effectively and proactively, but it also allows you to facilitate the work orders and assigning the right technicians with the right subcomponent assets or hot swappable assets on their vehicles, which are stock rooms, so that you can maintain your assets appropriately. So leveraging useful life in EAM, notifications can be created to service or replace aging equipment. You can streamline your operations through scheduling that preventive maintenance. And then all these things wrap up, and you've increased your uptime. And if you have downtime at all, you minimize that time. That leads us to poll number 3. Lauren?
Awesome. So our last poll of the day is about to launch. Here it goes. Everyone has about 20 seconds to answer. And the question is, based on what you've learned in this webinar, now would you say you are more proactive or reactive? So it looks like the answers have definitely swayed. We're now over half of our attendees are saying that they are proactive instead of reactive, which is great.
Awesome.
And one last piece of information, this webinar, I know a lot of you have been asking, it is going to be recorded, posted to YouTube, and there will be a follow-up email with the slides and the recording link. I know a couple of you have been asking, but now we have a little bit of time for a Q&A session. Daniel, Shane, and Chris have been answering some questions in the background as well. So guys, if there's any important questions that you want to share the answer with to the entire group, feel free to. And if anyone has any new questions, feel free to send those in now.
There is one that I wanted to for us to discuss, but before I get into that, I know we've talked about enterprise asset management, hardware asset management, software asset management, and the technology behind actually being able to be proactive versus reactive with that. But a lot of really kind of what was between the lines and what we've glossed over a little bit is the people that are needed to manage that and the processes that are needed to manage that. I know if you've been on any of the conversations with us previously about asset management, we beat it into the ground that process is so important whenever you're considering asset management. And so I didn't want to leave the webinar today without expressing that and saying, yes, the technology is great. But one of the things that really needs to be associated with that is defining a process and defining people to handle those processes to go along with it in order to be proactive.
Yeah, and just to kind of join in there was a question specifically that talked about, and it kind of goes along those lines, is, at large companies, do you see the software renewals being handled by the same team that manages software entitlements in ServiceNow? Separate teams, are they usually at least under the same larger ITAM umbrella, or might they be in unrelated areas? And so it's one of those, that question is so exactly what Shane just said, because a big part of it is, if you are large enough, it's very common that those are going to be multiple teams of people that are engaged with their particular point of that process, contract managers, approvers, the financial people that say, yep, we're going to go ahead and actually make that purchase. And then, so having a process with the proper people in your organization based on its size, based on its maturity level within these stages, yeah, you very well could have multiple teams that are engaged at very specific points in these processes. And you may have smaller teams where it is a little bit more, singular team focused, and they have a certain amount of authority to make purchases up to a certain amount before anybody is engaged. But a big question about that is, what are the people and teams that you have in your organization currently? How large is it? What size is the portfolio that you're managing? Because that's all of those things, all of those people and those numbers are going to indicate the size of those teams, and even whether ITAM as a practice is large enough in your organization to have its own teams in those disciplines underneath an ITAM umbrella. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've seen all kinds of those, but yeah, people, process. This technology helps support that, absolutely, and really works to try and leverage those practices and asset management as a discipline for organizations. But you really need to have people that own their position in those areas.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to hit two things real quick that are, one of them was addressed in the question that you responded to in the Q&A, Chris, but I want to add to it a little bit. And the other one extends this dialogue just a little bit. And that is centralizing your procurement efforts for ITAM or asset management as a whole, because EAM doesn't really fall under ITAM, it's asset management. Where we see problems and issues with, especially in the software asset management arena, is where if you have multiple departments allowed to buy their own software, you now have increased your spend, because you can't reclaim across departments very easily if those managers are saying, I bought it, I own it. And so anywhere you can centralize that procurement and distribution of software assets into, it also works well with hardware and EAM as well. But specifically software is where they tend to say, no, I bought it, I own it. And you begin to have issues with that reclamation and you lose some of your ability to be proactive. The other topic, real quickly, there was a question, or what are some of the common pitfalls to look out for when moving your ham program from reactive to proactive? And I have one nugget for you that I have seen countless times, and that is you proactively create the hardware model in your environment, and you bring in, you receive your device, your asset through an ASN or through essential receiving, or using the receive button on the purchase order form, or maybe it's the handheld device and you scan it. That's all awesome. But what happens when it's discovered is that model name is slightly different because it comes from the manufacturer and it's embedded in the BIOS. It's slightly different than what your team entered into the system. And so what sometimes happens is it'll overwrite what you wrote, or it may create a duplicate with a slightly different name. And now you've got a problem where duplicates are being introduced. So one of the recommendations that I have always had for my customers is change that transform map on your discovery source so that it doesn't overwrite what you've written, and you'll preclude duplicates.
And one of the questions too, actually, that was the question that I really wanted us to kind of discuss as a group, because there are a lot of steps that you can take to go from reactive to proactive. But touching on the normalization piece of this, I actually answered this in another one of the questions. But that content library that comes in from ServiceNow is so beneficial in the normalization process, because you're not going to get 30 different names for a model that all relate to a single model. You're actually going to be able to take that and normalize that in order to match that specific model. And then another tie-in to the data sources that we're talking about, bringing in the configuration items from your SCCM or Avanti or Intune or Jamf or even ServiceNow's Discovery, running it through the identification and reconciliation engine in ServiceNow will assist with that deduplication effort as well. So you're not going to get duplicate entries as much.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have for some questions. I know we answered a lot throughout the webinar. Once again, today's session was recorded. Everyone will get a follow-up email with that recording and the slides. A big thank you to Daniel, Shane, and Chris for presenting in today's webinar. It was some great information. And if anyone has any questions, wants to connect with GlideFast, feel free to send us an email at info@glidefast.com, and we will get you connected to the right people. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.